Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you all for joining us today for our Parent Lunch Cafe. I hope you all have your lunch, and I hope you all are ready to receive a plethora of great information. Today, I have the honor in introducing Dr. Hartman, who is a general pediatrician with over 20 years of experience practicing medicine. She has spent time in a variety of settings from rural to urban and has held several leadership positions. Currently, she serves as an associate professor and vice chair for diversity for the Department of Pediatrics for the Medical College of Georgia at Augusta University. Dr. Hartman is a board member for Child Enrichment, Augusta University Christian School, and Harrisburg Family Practice. She believes in community involvement, serving the underserved, and is passionate about equitable and patient-centered care, improving the quality of health care and the effect of adverse childhood experiences on development and behavior. Well, with no further ado, here is Dr. Hartman.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I am a general pediatrician, and what I do generally is I see kids that have behavior problems. And I work with the parents to help resolve these problems, or at least deal with it in a way that is helpful to the patients and the families. And the reason I got into this is because I realized that it seemed like there was a lot of people who their kids were on a whole lot of medications, and I didn't think that was the best way to be. I mean, a lot of it is understanding what goes on, and as a result of that, being able to take the best care of that child without just putting them on medication. So today we're going to talk about a topic that I like to call drama, trauma, or because of your mama. The people I work with get a kick out of the titles I come up with, but it's fun for me to try to get creative in the titles. But basically, we're going to talk about behavior. And when I talk about behavior, I usually do it in the context of children. But what you need to know is that this applies to adults and kids. And I think as we talk, you'll see that that is so true. So a few things. When you break it down, there's basically three reasons that kids act the way they do. And you could apply this to adults too, that there's three reasons that adults act the way they do. And the first is that it gets you something. So you go to work because it gets you a paycheck. You go, you do what you do because there's a reward or something, some benefit because of doing it. And with kids, you have to understand that they figure this out really early. Newborn babies cry because somebody comes and picks them up. Any behavior, there's a response or something that happens as a result of that. And some kids are motivated by knowing that if they act a certain way, they can get something. So if you're in the grocery store and that child is throwing a tantrum, and you just say, oh, I'm so embarrassed, let me just give them what they want, you've just reinforced that behavior and taught them that if they keep acting like that, they can keep getting what they want. The second reason people do the things they do is because a lot of people have a hard time explaining how they feel. And this is especially true for children. They don't know how to express what they feel. It doesn't make sense to them. They may feel two or three different things at the same time. And so their behavior is a way of just saying, hey, something's going on with me. So when you have that kid who is being bullied and they used to love school, but now you notice they hate going to school every day and they cry and they try not to and they're always sick, maybe there's something going on. Maybe that behavior is trying to tell you something. So that's another reason that people act the way they do. And the third thing is sometimes you're just feeling something and you just act as a result of feeling that way. If you just burst out in tears and you're like, why are you crying? And that kid is like, I don't know. They may not know. They're just feeling something very strong. And so they have a reaction. So those are the main reasons that not just kids, but everybody acts the way they do. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. Let's talk first, and I think the title said drama, trauma, or because of your mama, but we're going to start with trauma, because when I talk about trauma, I want you to understand what that is to me and what it is to physicians when we talk about trauma in the context of primary care. So, one of the things that we talk about are adverse childhood experiences. And these are experiences or events that kind of put you at risk for a physical, emotional, or social challenge. They have to happen before you're 18 years old. The more you have, the more at risk you are. And you have to take into account development. So, for instance, if you have a child that's 1 year old and they lose their mother to a car accident or something, that's still significant for that 1 year old. But think of the difference if that child was 8 and their mother died. There's a developmental way of understanding what is happening that is impacted and determines how much of an effect something has on a kid. And one thing that we'll also talk about is how do you balance that? If someone has a lot of bad experiences, how do you help them come out okay in the long run? And we'll talk a little bit about that too. When we talk about adverse childhood experiences, traditionally it was defined as 10 things, and it was related to the home environment. So, any child that was abused, neglected, if the home life was dysfunctional, like maybe they only had one parent, or they had a parent that was in jail or divorced, or there was some domestic violence going on in the house. Those were what we call the traditional ACEs because they all had to do with the home environment. Well, when they start studying the effect of trauma on children, they found out that wait, it's not just the home, it's everything that impacts that child. And so they kind of expanded and they said, okay, what else can have an effect on how a child develops and how they handle things? Well, it could be something that happens in the community, if they're homeless, if they're being bullied, if they're being discriminated against, if they have a serious disease, or they've become disabled, or like there's so many things that can happen that now we've kind of changed it to what we call the 3 areas of ACEs. So number one, there's your home, the home life. So everything that happens within the 4 walls of that house can have an effect. Then there's the community, and that includes going to a school that may not have all the resources, or violence in the community, seeing someone shot, or even just hearing that someone was shot in your neighborhood, or all the things that happen outside the home, but right in that immediate area. And then there's the environment. So think about the people who got displaced by Hurricane Katrina, or the pandemic. I mean, what better example do we have than that, and how that can significantly impact and change the way you view things. So now when we talk about adverse events, it's all these, it's all 3 realms. And when I talk about this, in order to understand why this is important, you have to understand stress and what stress is. And when we talk about stress, what we mean by that. So first, there's positive stress. And this is the kind of stress you feel like, say you wake up late, you hit the snooze, and then you went back to sleep. And now it's like 20 minutes you have to be at work. And so you're stressed because you're trying to do everything that you would have done in that 45 minutes, but now you only have 20 minutes. So you feel this stress. But then once you get to work and you get settled down, you kind of go back to your baseline, and it's okay. For kids, it might be the stress of studying for a test. And then once they take the test, it goes back to baseline. Then there's what we call tolerable stress. And what this is it's a more severe stress. So like maybe a loved one dies, or you get diagnosed with something, like say you got diagnosed with COVID, or, something that just is setting you back and really stressful. It takes longer to get back to your baseline. It may be weeks or months to get back to your baseline, but eventually you get back to your baseline. And then there's toxic stress. And what toxic stress is stress that you feel where you never actually go back to your baseline. So this is the kid who's going to school and they're being bullied. So every time they even think about school, the night before, when they're preparing their stuff, to their backpack and stuff for the next day, they're already starting to feel stressed because they know they're going to have to go to school. That bully's going to be waiting for them. they're scared, and they never really go back to baseline because they're always worried about it. There's always that stress response. That's toxic stress. And so when you talk about stress and trauma, and I'll use those words kind of interchangeably because they kind of mean the same thing to me, is that when you have one of these events, in order for it to be an event or to be considered an adverse event, is that it has to overwhelm you. So in this child, it overwhelms their ability to cope. And that's pretty easy to do in most kids because they just don't have a lot of coping skills. It's usually associated with something that is extreme or long lasting, chronic. And there is something that happens in your body when you experience that, that changes how you respond to things. And then it has an impact on how you act. And this is adult or children. There's some people that have difficulty controlling their emotions, and it's because they've been traumatized. They may have problems with relationships, with attachment or commitment or whatever. And then it also can affect their self esteem. So when you think about ACEs or trauma, you have to think about what's happening. And the example I like to use with adults is, imagine that you are you're going to take a walk around your neighborhood, and you know there's a dog, and this dog is usually behind the fence, but there are times when he gets out and he has attacked people. But you're determined that you're going to do this walk because you want to lose weight. And so you are getting ready to go for the walk. What are you going to do? So first of all, you're going to have something to prepare yourself. So you can have a stick or something, because if that dog comes, you're going to knock him out. You're not going to let him attack you, right? And so when you're doing that, there's things happening in your body. So the first thing is you shut off your prefrontal cortex, which is this area right here in the front of your brain, because you don't want to think about it. If that dog is coming for you, you don't want to be like, I wonder if I can outrun him. I wonder if I can get away. I wonder if he runs at 10 miles an hour and I can run 5 miles an hour. Like, you don't want to think about it. It should just be automatic. So you turn off your thinking part. Your memory doesn't matter. So you turn that off too, because you don't need that. So you need more sugar in your bloodstream. So your body's releasing all kind of glucose. Your blood sugar is going up because your body wants to have that sugar ready for your muscles, so that if you need to run, you don't just run 10 feet, you can run 10 blocks, and fast, because you need to be able to go. Your hearing is heightened. You have better hearing because you want to be able to hear when that dog comes for you. And so everything is kind of heightened, and you're in this state of readiness, this state of stress for this event. So imagine a child that's going to school to face a bully, and they're having all these same responses. Their brain is turned off because they're scared. They know they have to be ready, because what if they walk down this certain hall and that bully is there waiting for them? They can't think, they can't focus, because that part of their brain is turned off. So as a physician, I can give them all the medicine, all the ADHD medicine I want, until we deal with whatever that trauma is that's causing them to stay stressed out. It's not going to help. So that's how we try to think about it. Now, when we think about the because of your mama part of this, and I see that time is going fast, so I'm going to talk kind of fast, but this includes the study of epigenetics, which is the question came up of, can stress be passed on to your kids? And what they found is that parents who are chronically stressed, that you actually change your DNA. You produce more of the proteins that help in that stress response. You tend to have a higher blood sugar. You tend to, a lot of things are different in your bodies because of that. Well, your DNA can be changed permanent. Those genes that you have are changed, and you pass those genes on to your children. So they are more likely to have a higher blood sugar. They're more likely to have high blood pressure. They're more likely to have the things that are the effect of that stress that you're feeling. And these affect your brain. So again, the prefrontal cortex, the front part of your brain where you do your thinking, is shut off, and you do more thinking with the amygdala and the hippocampus, which are your emotional and reactive ways of thinking. So then I always get the question of drama. Well, oh, my kid's not going through anything. They're just dramatic. That's just the way they are. And yes, we know that when a kid is going through something, the part of their brain that is activated is that area that is that fight or flight response. But you have to ask yourself, when is it just drama? And you have to understand that there are different personality types. We all know that. Everyone who has kids know there's some that are just handle things better than others. And we call these our dandelion versus our orchid kids. So if you have an orchid and you touch it, it's probably going to wilt and fade. And all it takes is one little thing and it can be destroyed. Whereas if you have a dandelion, you can do almost anything and that thing pops back up, it spreads, you can use weed killer, whatever, pull it up by the roots, and it's still going to pop back up. So the personality does have an effect on how things are. But what we have to remember is that your body, when you think about how you process things, is going to follow the path of least resistance. So if you're used to just jumping into that fight or flight response, that very emotional response, then you're going to react that way. And these are the kids that tend to be kind of high strung versus the ones that are more laid back and they don't react to things as much. The other thing that I want you to remember is that every behavior has a trigger. And so one of the stories that I use is, say you have a dad, he's walking in the park, he's taking his daughter to the park and they're walking along and they pass these tree roots. And all of a sudden this child just starts going crazy. She's like crying and screaming and like hysterical. And the dad's looking at her like, what's wrong? And people who are walking by are like, oh, where's the mama? Because that dad doesn't know what he's doing, just all these things. And what this dad found out later is that when he was watching a movie the night before, the child had gotten out of bed and was sneaking to watch it. Well, the movie happened to be about a snake, and that snake bit somebody. So when she saw this tree root, all of a sudden it triggered, and she had this overreactive, dramatic response. But it kind of makes sense when you think about where that child is coming from. And one of the things we know about behaviors, when you talk about behaviors, everyone reacts a different way, and that there are many factors that influence that. And so even as adults, you can see that the fight or flight, or now there's four of them. It used to be fight or flight, then it was fight, flight, or freeze, and then it was fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So people have different ways of reacting to things, but every behavior is telling you something. And so what you have to understand is sometimes what we see is not really what is going on. And you have to learn to look beyond that. Kids learn to react a certain way. And one way that they act in how they act at home may not work for how they act at school. So if they're used to at home jumping up and down and running around, if they try to do that in school, that's not going to work. So kids have to learn that they can't act the same in every situation. And then you have to understand what triggers them. If that kid has a meltdown, what triggered that? There was something that was going on. That kid just didn't have a meltdown for no reason. So there's something that triggered that. And the other thing is when a behavior gets triggered, it's kind of like going down a steep slope. Once you start down, you have to get to the bottom. You can't stop them in the middle. And I think we can understand that. Think about a time that you've been really upset about something. And as soon as someone comes and says, calm down, you're like, no, I'm not going to calm down. What are you talking about? Calm down. It is when you're going down that hill and you're on that path, you have to let it in. When they're in that fight or flight mode, their thinking brain is turned off. So you have to wait until they get through with that episode to where their thinking brain is turned back on to reason with them. You can't reason with anyone who's in that mode, and that's child or adult. So just remember that if someone's been triggered, let it play out. They're not going to be able to reason with you at that time. Okay. And then making sure that we respond in a developmentally appropriate way and understanding why it matters. I'm going to send these slides out to anyone who wants them so you can look at this. This just tells some of the ways that trauma can impact kids. It impacts every part of our lives. And so resilience is what we want to develop in kids so that they have what they need to be able to cope and to deal with stress without developing these triggers and having these big responses. And there's ways to do that. In kids, if you build their understanding, explain things to them when they're calm, help build their confidence, make sure that they're interacting with other kids and with adults that care about them, showing them right and wrong, giving them an example by how you react to things, and then letting them help other people, encouraging them to help other people really helps. And then letting them make decisions and build the trust that they have. One of the things I always say is a hug is great. Hugs, when you get hugged by someone that you want to be hugged by, it releases a chemical called oxytocin, which is the love hormone. And what that does is when you have that release, it neutralizes stress. So it neutralizes that stress response. It balances your nervous system. When people say, "Oh, does my kid need this immune booster?" I always say, no, just give them a hug every day. If you hug them and you let them know you love them, that's just as good as any echinacea or all the other things that people buy to give their kids to help boost them. And so the big thing that I want you to understand, because I know we're getting close to time and I want to give time for questions, the take home message that I want you to get out of this is that kids don't always have the words, and adults don't always have the words to express what they're feeling. And so they act in a way that that will tell you what's going on with them. You just have to learn how to interpret that. And every behavior, everything, how we react to our environment, it's influenced by our genes, it's influenced by our past experiences, our age, our personality type, everything that's going on with us. And another thing that I want you to make sure you understand is that these adverse experiences are subjective. So what triggers one person or is an event for one person may not affect someone else at all. So if I break up with my boyfriend, I may be like, okay, good riddance. Somebody else breaks up with their boyfriend, they may be ready to end their life. So everybody responds to things in different ways. So if a kid comes and they're crying and they say, "Oh, I dropped all my books and I was so embarrassed," don't say, "Oh, that's nothing. This, today, our we're in trouble of being evicted from our home. So that's nothing." Like everything matters to that person. So you have to take it as whatever is affecting them. And the positive thing about this is that every negative thing you go through can be counteracted or supported by having a loving, nurturing relationship with someone. And I like to show these pictures of my family. My father died of cancer when I was young, and we were very poor after that. My mom didn't have a job. We lived on the state, everything was really difficult. But because my mom always encouraged me, I always knew that she was supportive of me and she made me feel like I could do anything. Despite everything we went through, I'm a doctor. And I tell people that to say, look where you can be. It doesn't matter where you come from. It just matters, do you have the support and do you feel like you can make it? And so any kid can do anything. And that's the message that I try to give out. Any questions that we have? I don't know if people put questions in the chat or what. Maybe someone can help me answer questions.
Yes, well, I seen a couple of people just posted comments saying those were some good analogies, and that hugs are healing, hugs are powerful. So they've just been making a little comments here and there. But Dr. Hartman, this information has been amazing, and going through listening to some of the slides, especially about the brain. Well, I'm gonna pause mine. I do have a question. Do you have a book for parents?
So the best thing that I would recommend, and I think it's the next slide. Yeah, I have some resources. I think the websites are probably better than books because books get outdated so fast nowadays. And like I said, I'll send out these slides and you'll be able to click on this and get more information. And the third reference, the PACES connection is probably the best website out of all of them, because it gives you information on adverse events. It lets you take a test to see, like, what is your score and what does that mean. That's probably the best resource out of all of them.
Okay, that's awesome. And you said that you will be able to send these slides out to anybody that
I
okay.
will, I will send them to you, and you can send it out to anyone who reaches out.
Okay, amazing. And then there's another question. Is there a resiliency gene?
So there's tons of research being done, and there is some. It's not a gene directly, but it's the way we process proteins. And so our genes inhibit or produce more proteins depending on our internal environment. So if we're stressed, we produce certain proteins. If we're dealing with things well and we're calm and we have a lot of oxytocin, then we're going to do different proteins. So that is what is passed down. Even if you have been stressed for a long time, that can be reversed. You can change your genes and so that's why you hear a lot of things like a lot of talk of mindfulness, yoga, anything like that, that kind of helps you get back to that calm state so that you're producing the hormones and the chemicals that are positive and not the stress hormones.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. That's good information. And I noticed, like I was saying before, how um, some of the things that you were talking about the brain, and when somebody is angry or having being triggered, how you can't talk to them. We teach a program called Love Notes, and that's one of the pieces in it when we talk about the angry brain. And when we demonstrate it for our kids, we take a clear bottle of water when we put an Alka-Seltzer in it, and we show them how when you get triggered or when you're upset, how your brain just fuzzes up and you can't see clearly and you can't think clearly, and you have to wait until you calm down before you start thinking with your higher brain again. And so I just love the way that you touched on that, and that I can see that that ties into lessons that we're currently teaching some of our youth as well, on how to try to properly, for one, identify their triggers. And when they realize that they're in a space to where their triggers have been identified, how to, properly channel those emotions and the things that they're going through in that moment. And I noticed that someone put a comment that they love how resiliency and love covers, you basically takes out pills, like resiliency and love. And I can attest to that. I can attest to that. Hugs and having supportive people and having people there to just hold you up when you're having your moments. That outweighs any type of medicine that you can go and take just so you can lay down, so you don't have to feel at that moment.
Well, and this is important for adults too. We talk about it in the context of kids, but it's just as important for adults, and to understand what your triggers are as an adult too. And once you can recognize it, having something that you can do that will stop it from being challenged, stop you from being triggered, that you can deal with what you're feeling without having to have that reaction.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, did anybody else have any other questions? Did you have any other anything else to put out, Dr. Hartman?
No, I'm glad to. I'm thankful that you invited me. I'm glad to hear that you guys are doing stuff like this to help develop coping skills, because I think that's the key. And again, I don't like to see kids on medication, so anything that you can do to help develop coping skills, I think keeps kids off, just being given medication to solve their behavior problems.
Yes, absolutely. And I agree with you. And so, yes, y'all, thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for being a part of our parent cafe. I hope you was able to get full off your lunch, but get full off of the drama, trauma, or because of your mama segment today. Like Dr. Hartman said, she'll send me the slides. So if you are interested, please email me and I can get those slides out to you as soon as I can. And enjoy the rest of your day.